Advanced Math Lesson 27, Related Angles and Signs of Trigonometric Functions. So when we talk about related angles, this is something that we've kind of been dancing around, a concept that we've already talked about as far as polar coordinates and trigonometric problems like our blimp problems. Related angles are quite simply angles that overlap on the unit circle. So when we see this angle of 135 degrees, a related angle is 45 degrees because it would help land on the same vector, right? Or we could even take that 45 and start from this 90 degree post or this 90 degree axis, and we'd get 45 here. So both of those angles will get us on the same vector of the unit circle, and so the sines, the cosines, the tangents will be the same. Now, once we understand what related angles are, that brings us to the sine. No, why am I doing that? I don't need the book. I need this drawing. All right, that brings us to the signs of trigonometric functions. So there's this cool little chart that I just drew out for you guys. It has a cool little rhyme. The rhyme goes counterclockwise, and it says that all students take calculus. And most of you are thinking like, yeah, right. But it is a good way to help you remember. So the first quadrant here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, all students take calculus. The first quadrant is telling us that all will be positive. So this is what they're talking about with trigonometric signs. Depending what quadrant you're in will determine what sign your trigonometric identity is going to be. So if you're in the first quadrant, sine, cosine, and tangent, all positive. And remember that tangent can be expressed as sine divided by cosine. That'll make more sense as we go on. So in the first quadrant, all positive. Now, in the second quadrant, students standing for sine. In the second quadrant, only sine is positive, and we'll see that cosine and tangent are negative. Now, if you look back at tangent, it's equal to sine divided by cosine, so positive divided by a negative equals a negative. Now take third quadrant, t means tangent is positive, and everything else is negative. And then if we take sine, which is negative, divided by cosine, which is negative, we get a positive. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, last quadrant, calculus. So cosine will be positive. So we have a positive cosine, negative sine, negative tangent, and then again to prove negative tangent, negative divided by positive is a negative. So this is a little chart, and these signs are a fact that we need to remember and we need to constantly reference as we do these problems. If you don't, it'll be really frustrating because your numbers and your answers will always be slightly off, either just by a positive or a negative, or because you added when you said it should have subtracted. So remember, all students take calculus, quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, all positive, sine positive, tangent positive, calculus positive. Now let's apply this to some actual problems. Where's my paper? There it is. Okay. So the problems we're going to see are going to look like this. They're going to tell you to evaluate 4 times the cosine of 135 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and draw quadrant. I'm going to go positive 135 degrees, which ends in the second quadrant. Now, if I'm in the second quadrant, that means sine is the only positive, right? Cosine will be negative. So I'm going to go ahead and use my 45 reference triangle. So 135 degrees would either give me 45 on this side or this side. Really doesn't matter which side I use. I'll get the same answer either way. So I reconstruct my 45. I'll zoom in so you guys can see my tiny writing. The sides of this are going to be 1, 1, and root 2, since we memorized that. And then we have to take the cosine of the 45 degree angle. So cosine is going to be the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So that's going to be 1 over square root of 2. And then remember that in this quadrant, cosine is negative. From there, we rationalize this, and it becomes negative root 2 over 2. And then we have to multiply that by 4. When we multiply, we can cross cancel. That becomes 1, that becomes 2. So our final answer becomes negative 2 root 2. Pretty easy. Just don't forget about your signs based on quadrant. Now let's go to the next example. We'll throw a bunch of negatives in here. Evaluate negative 2 times the cosine of negative 150 degrees. So I'll draw my coordinate system. Starting from origin, I'm doing an angle of depression since it's negative. So I go negative 150. All right, that gives me a 30, 60, 90 triangle because the distance from 150 to 180 is 30 degrees. From here, I remember that the short side opposite of 30 is a length of 1, the side opposite of 60 is square root 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. Now I can go ahead and start working. Also, in the third quadrant, tangent is positive, which means cosine is going to be negative. So when I take the cosine of 30 degrees, I take the adjacent, which is root 2, put it over the hypotenuse, which is 3. So I get negative root, sorry, I said that backwards, root 3 over 2. Yeah, you know. So adjacent of root 3 over 2, it's going to be negative because it's in the third quadrant. And then what we have is negative 2 times negative root 3 over 2. And when I cross multiply, the 2's will cancel. But I still have negative 1 times negative root 3, which just gives me positive root 3. All right, so it's pretty simple once we understand everything. And there's a little bit of memorization to be done before we can properly solve these. One last example in case you're still having trouble with it. They give us 5/3 times the cosine of 300. So I'll go ahead and draw my coordinate system. I go all the way around. That's 90, 180, 270, and 300 is going to end somewhere in here. Now the question is how far? So I can go to my different points. So if you memorize these 4 degrees, that will definitely help you out a lot. Highly recommend it. So we have 90, 180, 270, and 0/360. Now if this is 270 and our degree is at 300, we know that this angle is 30 degrees and this angle is 60 degrees. So I'll go ahead and draw a reference triangle. If this is 60, this is 30. Opposite of 60 is the long side of square root 3. Opposite of 30 is the short side of 1, and the hypotenuse is 2. So I need to find the cosine, and in this quadrant, all students take calculus. Cosine is positive. So whatever my answer is, it will be positive. So I'll take the cosine of 300, which is the same as the cosine of 60. I'll take the adjacent side, which is 1, put it over the hypotenuse of 2, and that gives me a positive 1/2. And then I take that and I multiply it by 5/3, which just gives me 5/6, which is my final answer. All right, I hope this helps. If you guys have any questions, message me on Moodle, and I'll see you in class.